land is the starting point of all reform, is the single most important agenda on the government's radar, because it is on land where projects will be set up, where smart cities will be built, where bullet trains will be run, where big machines will roar, and which is why the Modi government believes the land laws have to be eased, something that it did earlier today. The Cabinet approved the ordinance for amendments to the Land Acquisition Act.
The Cabinet recommended to the President the promulgation of an ordinance to amend the Land Acquisition, Rehabilitation and Settlement Act. After extensive consultations with state governments and other stakeholders with regard to the process of acquisition.
The Land Acquisition Act, which was one of the key reasons behind stalled investments, but the government hopes the proposed changes will make the Land Act more industry-friendly. Under the new changes, 5 sectors of defence, rural infrastructure and electrification, industrial corridors, affordable housing and PPP projects are now exempted from the stringent land acquisition laws. Procedural rigours have been significantly eased. The social impact study, which was earlier mandatory, has also been relaxed. But no changes have been made to relief and compensation clauses, keeping the interest of the farmers in mind.
The priority of the government was that the interest of the farmers whose land is likely to be acquired is also paramount. At the same time, it has to be balanced with the developmental needs of the society.
Issues related to the land acquisition was one of the primary reasons behind stalled PPP projects worth over 18 lakh crores. And which is why experts say the proposed changes will not only give stalled infrastructure projects a lease of life, but will also help fresh investments break ground and revive growth. But land has always been a political hot potato. The question is, will an ordinance be enough to inspire confidence, or will the investors wait for that final approval from the Parliament? The unrest in the recent past over faulty land acquisition has in fact made the industry once bitten and twice shy. Ruchi Bhatia, PT Now, New Delhi.
All right, let's get you more perspective and more expert voices on that really big story that many people believe is game-changing, because land is where everything really begins. We're joined by Ajit Mittal of Indiabulls Group. Thanks to each one of you for sparing time on this very cold winter evening, at least here in New Delhi. But let's take this forward with you, Mr. Talwar. You have your skin in the game. What do you make of these changes introduced in the land laws? Will this really pave the way for industrialization? Will it really clear all these impediments that India Inc., including yourself, has voiced time and again?
As far as the real estate, housing and construction industry goes, I think one can very cheerfully say that yes, what we were really concerned about was the delay in time, and I'm sure so was the manufacturing industry concerned with it, that it's not the compensation which makes a difference. It is actually the delay in time, which was as long as a 5-year period if everything went according to schedule. But we know for a fact that in land acquisition process, when you have to take consent of everybody, and it has to be only on paper and through the regular quasi-judicial process of issuing notices, calling people, hearing them out, recording everything, it would have definitely taken more than 5 years. I think the government has done a very, very wise step in removing these time-oriented impediments. The compensation and the rehabilitation package would continue to be same, which everyone will then take into account while costing of the projects. Now, whether it is an industrial project or whether it is a real estate and housing construction project.
Right, Mr. Dua, comment on that. The government is choosing the ordinance route. Let's talk about the big picture for way too many things. They did that with insurance. Obviously, there is a political logjam as well. But given that, at the end of the day, for something as sensitive as land laws, Parliament is clearly the right place to make laws. Is the ordinance route sustainable, according to you?
I'm not sure whether it's sustainable, but occasions do, or circumstances do give rise to the government having to choose that route. And I think the government, finding itself not able to push through legislations in the upper house, was left with very little option but to push these through the ordinance route, and that certainly I would justify its use for purposes of the passing the insurance bill, which was stuck basically in the upper house. The question is on land acquisition, etc., the government had probably not made up its mind so far. There wasn't any amendment moved so far, or in the lower house or the upper house. So I think to some extent the privilege given to the government has been, it has extended it by legislating through the ordinance route even on other matters. But as you know, these things are valid only till the beginning of the next session of Parliament, which is not too far off. Not much work or action, investment, acquisition may occur under the ordinance route. People will probably wait and watch, and by then, for a couple of months, and by then we will have the next session of Parliament, Parliament starting.
Let's get an industry view on that. People likely to be in wait and watch mode, says Ajay Dua. But Mr. Mittal, comment on that. How important are the changes that have been made in the Land Acquisition Act? Are they game changing? How much of a material impact will this have on corporate India?
Well, I would say that this is a very fine balancing act between the imperative of the development on one side and also protect the interest of the farmers and other rural landowners on the other side. While nothing much has been done in terms of the compensation and in terms of the relief and rehabilitation package, so the economic impact on the people who are going to acquire the land pretty much remains as it was. What has essentially undergone a change is the implementation part, which is going to be a lot more easier than what it was earlier, at least in respect of those 5 broad categories. What they have is the national security, industrial corridors, affordable housing, housing for the weaker sections. So land acquired for these purposes, definitely the acquisition is going to be fast-tracked, which in my view is a big plus, because earlier it was a very cumbersome process that was required to be followed in terms of getting consents. 80% of the people affected had to give their consents, the Gram Panchayat had to give consents, there was a social impact assessment and all that has been rightly given a go-by to fast-track this. So to that extent, yes, definitely it will be a big kicker. It will be a big boost to the infrastructure sector, the manufacturing industry, and also more importantly to the affordable housing segment.
Mr. Dua, let's begin to talk specifics because the consent clause has been significantly diluted. 5 sectors exempted from this. Does this risk controversy later by those who disagree and are not a part of that consent or do not give their consent? Or does this really pave the way for investments to flow in? Does this really make acquisitions easy?
I think it will make acquisition easy for what is clearly a public purpose. The public purpose doesn't necessarily mean it had to be owned by the public. It could be privately owned, as in the case of infrastructure, etc. The government has clearly now said we are including certain things in the definition of infrastructure, and hospitals and educational institutions are the 2 things which were being talked about.